Over the last decade, higher education has undergone one of the most profound transformations in its history. Students today are no longer choosing a university based on solely on a degree. They're looking for global exposure, meaningful industry experience, international opportunities, and above all, an education that prepares them for a rapidly evolving world of work. At the same time, universities themselves are reimagining how and where world class education is delivered. As borders become more connected, students increasingly seek the quality of an international education while remaining closely connected to the opportunities right here at home. It is against this backdrop that we are witnessing a significant movement for higher education in India, with the establishment of the University of Southampton Delhi, the first UGC approved international university campus in the country. Joining us today is someone who has spent his career shaping institutions, driving academic innovation, and preparing students for the future of work. Dr. Vishal Talwar is the Chief Operating Officer of the University of Southampton Delhi. A distinguished academic and higher education leader, his experience spans globally renowned institutions including the London School of Economics, SP Jain School of Global Management, BML Munjal University, and IMT Ghaziabad. His work in research, innovation, and industry engagement has consistently focused on one central question: how can universities better prepare students for a changing world? Dr. Talwar, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank
So
you.
I'll jump straight into the conversation. Industry is changing, technology is changing, universities are changing. How do you stay relevant, and what is it that the student is expecting from higher education today?
Look, thank you very much for the invitation. I think the students are expecting quite a bit, and rightly so. Yeah, there was a time when you were essentially requiring certain knowledge as a student and a degree, of course. But over a period of time, the kind of dynamics, the kind of macroeconomic changes, the kind of technological changes, the kind of expectation alignment that we've seen around has led to a lot of change in what students are looking for, a lot of change in what the universities are also offering. Right. So, as a forward-looking university like ours, University of Southampton, which is very research intensive as a university, I think we realize that the students are entering a world which is very different. Are entering a world where you'll have multiple careers, then you'll have very different work modes, right? You have the gig economy, you have this whole focus on climates, you'll have this whole focus on sustainability, you have this whole focus on working from home, for example. You have this whole focus on how AI is making a shift in terms of organizational structures. The onus is on universities to be able to prepare students for the longer term, prepare students for the next many, many years. Of course, domain is important, subject knowledge is important, but equally important is holistic development. Equally important is how do you make critical decisions. Equally important is how do you solve problems which are multidimensional problems. So automatically, there's a lot of responsibility on the university to be able to meet the expectations of the students of today.
You mentioned research. Southampton has been known for its research excellence. However, India is a very different market. Culture is very different. Upbringing is very different. So, in terms of academic standardization, how do you ensure that a student studying in India is at par with academic standards there in the UK?
Look, right from the beginning, we are not just global in theory, but we are global in practice, right? So the whole idea is that we are an institution that is global right from the beginning, global in thought, global in curriculum. And automatically, we are what is known as a triple helix university. So we believe that, students, when we talk about research or we talk about being research intensive, we are talking about this whole idea of asking the right questions. We talk about this whole idea of being inquiry driven. We talk about this whole idea of being inquisitive, this whole idea of analyzing issues from multidimensional perspective, analyzing problems from multidimensional perspective, not necessarily let's say be one trick ponies, but look at situations and then be able to address those situations. Remember that when you are research oriented, which means when you analyze issues from a deeper perspective, be more reflective, I think that also enables you to become more career oriented. What is this day? What are organizations wanting right now from its young graduates? They are wanting people who are able to hit the ground running, are able to contribute economic value from day one. Now, automatically that means that your ability to analyze things, your ability to be create more effective decision making, be able to communicate better. All these things become fundamentally important. So if you are research orientated, if you are focusing on things from a deeper perspective, if you're able to not just regurgitate ideas but create new ideas, I think automatically you're someone who's able to contribute not only to practice but also to whatever you would like to do, whichever sector you want to work in, whether it's non-governmental organizations, whether it is the private sector, whether it is the government sector, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter.
Yes.
So look, we as University of Southampton academic ecosystem, whether it is the UK, whether it is Malaysia, whether it is now India, I think we have a predominant objective of being what is known as a triple helix university, right? So it's about teaching, it's about research, and it's also about knowledge enterprise and exchange. What does that research do, right? How does it create impact in the real world? How does it create impact in practice? How does it create impact in industry? So at University of Southampton Delhi, we are essentially not just about a teaching focused university. We are essentially looking at all three of the elements, right? So when we say we are research intensive, what that basically means is that we would like the student to explore deeper. We would like the student to analyze situations deeply, multidimensional perspectives. We would like them to be more reflective. We would not just like them to regurgitate the ideas that already exist, but also create new ideas. Now, of course, this also helps the industry. This helps the economy because it helps you create new perspectives. It helps you create new services. It helps you in the long term create new products. And what does a growing economy like ours want? They would like to have a lot of this impact within the higher education ecosystem, right? So I think we believe that fundamentally students in India are very aspirational. They have a certain reverence towards education. They would like to evolve. They would like to progress forward. And I think in our experience, they're very easily able to pick onto these ideas. They're easily able to modify their approach in the classroom, get into more depth. Of course, what you also have to remember is that our faculties are the ones who are able to mentor them. Our faculties are the ones who are able to guide them, take them onto that path, and everything else then falls into place.
Just to elaborate on the research part of things, what kind of infrastructure support, you mentioned faculty, if you could just elaborate more on that, what kind of support does a student get?
Absolutely. So, for us, when I spoke about the faculty, I spoke about the infrastructure. A lot of our faculty are actually faculty who've been trained or done their PhD or actually taught or have experience abroad.
Oh, wow.
Now, whether that be in the US, whether that be in the UK, whether that be in other parts of the world, like Australia, right? So when we talk about bringing in a global curriculum, when we talk about bringing in a global, process of thought, we would want our faculty to also be a part of that, right? So automatically, a number of our faculty, actually faculty, whether of Indian origin or otherwise, are faculty who've been doing exactly that, right? So they have that experience of working with students. They have that experience of being able to mentor, guide the students. They're able to, create that kind of atmosphere in the classroom. Obviously, you have to do a lot of, research. You'll have to be able to analyze things. You have to be able to get into more depth, right? And the faculty are equipped to be able to do exactly that. So that's something that is common across, us being a Russell Group university. Yes. So it is very, very important for us to ensure that our faculty are able to create that kind of experience in the classroom, create those wow moments in the classroom, create the kind of atmosphere that would help students engage and be able to learn without any hesitation in the classroom. Apart from that, if you look at the kind of campus we have, in the Delhi NCR area, the campus itself, the learning environment, the kind of infrastructure we have over there, the kind of let's say the Bloomberg lab that we've created, the kind of electronic lab that we've created, the kind of creative computing lab that we have created. These are all examples of the very high-end infrastructure which will also enable this level of deeper thought, this level of deeper engagement, this level of deeper teaching. and of course, research as well.
Dr. Talwar, over the last 4 5 years, essentially post COVID, we've seen a slight change in the mindset of not just students but also parents who are also decision makers, essentially. So the question today is not which university should I take up, which university should I enroll into, but how do I ensure that my learning experience bears fruit? How do I ensure that, the question today is not which university, but where will this university take me in the future? So how do you ensure, or how do you answer this question? Because India is a very rapidly changing market, and decision making is something that we also have to look at.
I agree with you. I think, quite frankly, let me come back to our first question, which is about what's the role of universities and what's the role of progressive universities. Look, India is changing. Its requirements are changing. We have this whole objective of 2047, being a Viksit Bharat or a developed economy, and automatically that also means that the higher education ecosystem, whether by themselves or in collaboration, also have to contribute towards that, right? So what you also need to remember is that a lot of the magic, a lot of the learning just doesn't happen in the classroom. It also happens what we do outside, right? How do you curate your external experiences, right? Is it just about having faculty in the classroom? Is it just about having guest sessions in the classroom? Right. Is it just about having an enterprise center, right, or an innovation center, within the university? It's about the marriage of all this together, right? It is about being able to, create those wow experiences. It is about getting to solve industry level problems right from day one. So I'm very happy to mention that whether it's our undergraduate students, whether it is our postgraduate students, both of them have the ability and the exposure to be able to work with the industry from very early on in their programs. Right. So these things, whether it's industry visits, whether it is our innovation projects, whether you do them in the groups, whether you do them individually, these are all ways and means to be able to apply a lot of the knowledge and the thinking that you're able to be a part of, within the classroom. Right. So these are all experiences that we bring in very early on. Right. What are students looking at right now? Students are looking at the impact of what they learn in the outside world, right? What does it mean? How is it able to change things? How is it able to transform things? So the kind of atmosphere you need to be able to create is that atmosphere when what you're learning in the classroom is directly applicable outside the classroom as well. So we've been able to create that kind of foundation. It's been more than a year now for us as far as our academic operations are concerned. And we find that our students really relish these opportunities. Our students really relish the kind of labs we have, the electronics lab or the Bloomberg Financial Lab, or our enterprise innovation approaches, or even our career advancement services. They really relish the opportunity to engage with the people. They really relish the opportunity to engage with the industry. We have boot camps, wherein boot camps are not just about entrepreneurship. The boot camps are also about what do you do as far as careers are concerned. Where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? Opening up the horizons. These are all things that you really have to do. I keep coming back to my first point. This whole idea of the role of the university has actually changed quite a bit.
No, I'm sure it has, and now that you mentioned, the support system sort of exists. But it's also important to sort of apply those skills. Absolutely. And I think that's what the industry today is really investing in. It's not just the degree that you possess, it's also how you apply those skills.
Absolutely.
So for a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old listening to you today, looking at 5 years, 10 years down the line, maybe not even 10, just maybe 4 years, 5 years down the line, what are those 3 top skills that you think a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old has to really dwell on, really work on?
Look, there are quite a few skills, right? These skills revolve around different aspects, right? We cannot take away the importance of subject knowledge, right? So that's one element that is something that is fundamentally important. It's not just about the theory, but it's also about the practice. It's not just about the concept, but it's also about the context. Where do I apply the concept?
Yes.
Right. But at the same time, whether it's about the industry, whether it's about how careers are being shaped, whether it is about technological transformation, whether it's about the uncertainty that exists around, I think some of the top skills are around critical decision making, right? Are around decision making under uncertainty. how do I thrive under ambiguity,
Mm.
right? We're getting into very ambiguous zones, and there are plenty of examples around. How do I make decisions under ambiguity? What steps do I take? Not just for myself, but also for the people that I work with, also the people that I will lead with, in the future, right? So how do I ensure that is happening? How do I ensure that there's a lot of emotional development of my own self becomes important? Communication also becomes fundamentally very, very important. I might have a lot of information in my head. I might have a lot of knowledge in my head, the subject knowledge. But if I'm not able to convey that knowledge outside to, groups of one or groups of many, then automatically, my ability to be effective, my ability to be impactful gets impacted.
So how do you ensure, at Southampton that there's a right mix of technical and skills like these, where decision making, also research, one has to take decisions based on ample and adequate information. Typically students today, or the next generation, is they're quick with decisions without having adequate information. So how do you ensure that a student studying today in Southampton is not making those mistakes, or the ecosystem around him or her is ensuring that those mistakes aren't made?
No, I would agree. I think at times we do tend to make decisions based on gut feel, which is okay. But at times, it works. At times, it doesn't work. So for us, it is important within the classroom, whether the kind of projects that we have, whether the kind of experiments that we do, for depending on the nature of the course, the kind of innovation projects they do in groups or for organizations as an individual. I think those ready the student for the ambiguous world, right? What you also have to remember is that there's a lot of insistence on being able to make decisions based on data, right? Not necessarily taking things at face value, but looking at it from a multidimensional perspective.
True.
What we do encourage the students to realize is that when they become technical leaders of the future, when they become corporate leaders of the future, or whatever they would like to do in problems will not come across as a mechanical problem. It will not come across as a electronics problem. It will not come across as just a simple, let's say, maybe a marketing problem.
Right.
These problems are intertwined. How do I decipher these things? How do I ensure that I'm able to untangle a lot of the uncertain strains that exist, right? So the long story short, the kind of storytelling that happens in the classroom, the kind of case discussions that take place, the kind of simulations that we do, right? The kind of very evolved industry-oriented individuals who come into the classroom and talk about the kind of things that they've done. A lot of that helps students realize that there's much more complexity out there. How do you create more strategic thought processes? Right? How do you evolve that? How do you ensure that you are inferring strategies based on information, based on multidimensional thought processes, based on strategic thought processes as well? So I think a lot of these things go into it. What you also have to remember is that students have the opportunity to do long projects for themselves, right? Work, do internships in the industry, and also do dissertations. So in those dissertations, they do, they go through this entire process of analyzing information, analyzing literature, collecting data, then basically analyzing that information, coming up with their own inferences, their own strategies, their implications, and also get tested on them.
True.
Right. So these are all ways and means by which you're able to create that kind of deeper thinking atmosphere within the classroom. We also encourage our students to not just be in the silos, right? So you have the kind of courses we have is, computer science, we have software engineering courses, we have management, accounting, finance, we have creative computing courses, we have finance art courses. These are all, and we encourage the students to work together in groups, right, as well. So we don't want the students to be in silos. We want them to work together on projects, on creating solutions, work in the labs, so that they're able to open up their horizons. They are able to understand, that when they are out there in the world making decisions under uncertainty, there's a lot at stake,
Yeah, I'm sure.
right?
Yeah.
There's not just them at stake. There's not just, let's say, a small group. But when they make decisions, it has an impact not just on the organization, but on society as well.
I'm sure it does. I'm
Right.
sure. So interesting that you mentioned we are sort of able to experience or so at least visualize the infrastructure, the support system that's there at Southampton. But what does a typical day of a student studying in Southampton, Delhi, look like?
The students keep telling me that, you kept us very busy all the time, right? So, and of course we do, right? So it's important that students get the right kind of experience in the classroom. They get the right kind of university, atmosphere, right? So the day might start with, classroom lectures.
Right.
It might move on to an industry guest session who might talk about the strategies they adopted to launch a technology-based product, in India or in another part of the world. It might move on to, for example, one of our, very established faculties from across the world, right? From Southampton, for example. Very recently, we had, Dame Wendy Hall, right? She was here for the AI summit, right? She was one of the keynote speakers for that summit, right? So have a session with her on how AI has been transforming the landscape, and of course Southampton's involvement, in that, because Southampton's had a long history of research impact within, internet technologies, within, artificial intelligence, fiber optics, for example, right? It might then move on to, a career advancement session wherein, it's about mentoring. It's about understanding, where would you like to go? Or it could be about, designing a resume. It could be about, what are the kind of internships you're looking at, preparing for those internships. It could be about group discussion sessions, right? It could also involve, let's say, an interview with one of the internship organizations. It could then move on to, some activities related to committees and the clubs, right? So we have a number of committees and clubs. These, so we would like the student to experience the entire atmosphere. We would like the student to experience and make it all count, because fundamentally, when you're trying to develop someone from, scratch, when you're trying to give the right kind of experience, the right kind of atmosphere, the right kind of engagement, you really have to be able to curate a lot of all this. And a lot of all this is not just about what happens in the classroom. It is also about how we are able to ensure that they start learning decision making. They start learning, how to, run, let's say, small institutions like the committees or their clubs, or even, their, the placement committees for that matter. So we also have, something like that to be able to keep them occupied, help them understand, become leaders in the true sense.
It's interesting how I see most of the audience today listening to us, that is watching us today, is the younger generation, and they would love to experience what happens in the day of a student at the University of Southampton, Delhi. Any success story or any one proud moment from the last 12 months? You've completed one academic cycle, so firstly, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But any one success story or one proud moment for you individually that you could sort of highlight, from a student's perspective?
Right. So we're in the process of completing one full academic cycle. So a lot of our master's students are currently in the dissertation phase, right? But obviously, the whole focus has been there for us for quite some time, right? So we were very, very engaged, very involved, very enthusiastic about setting up, our campus, in India. And of course, there are a number of success stories. And these success stories are things which give us a lot of satisfaction, right? When you see that glint in the eye, when you see a student coming up to you and saying that, thank you very much, I've been able to successfully convert this, placement opportunity, right? So since I'm talking about placement opportunities, there are a number of our, students who already are in a number of internship-linked placement roles. There are a number of them who already placed, on a full-time, basis as well. Right. Whether that be with, e-commerce kind of organizations, whether that be in consulting firms, whether that be in banks, whether that be in technology organizations. So we already have that, those success stories for ourselves. We have situations wherein students not just come from India. There's students from the outside as well, from the
Right.
Middle East,
Right.
who's come along to study here. And when they tell you about, this has really transformed me, the kind of thoughts I came along with,
Yeah.
and the kind of thoughts I'm leaving with, the kind of network I'm leaving with, the kind of changed mindset that I'm leaving with, the kind of global oriented knowledge that I'm leaving with, I think it gives you a certain sense of satisfaction. It kind of tells you that you're on the right track. Your objectives of being able to create and offer a globally oriented curriculum
Right.
in India with the right mindset, with the right kind of infrastructure, with the right kind of faculty and experience is bearing fruit, right? Apart from that, when we did our boot camps as well, these are boot camps where you see the students very engaged, right? They come along with their own amazing ideas. Some of them have actually won prizes
Wow.
even at the Southampton global level as well,
Okay.
right? So their own innovative ideas that have actually contributed to being recognized at the Southampton level, which includes UK, includes Malaysia, includes India. We have our own students who are actually running startups as well.
Okay.
So I think this gives you, like I keep saying, like a broken record, that it gives you a sense of satisfaction. And of course, this is just the beginning, right? This is just a beginning wherein we know that the kind of framework we put in place, the kind of structures we put in place, and the way we get the feedback, the way the students respond to us, the kind of atmosphere we've been creating, I think that does give you a sense of satisfaction. So I might be a chief operating officer, but at heart, if you look at, I'm also a faculty, right? So it gives you a sense of satisfaction because for a faculty to see transformation actually taking place is very, very satisfying.
No, I'm sure it's satisfying and exciting both at the same time. This brings me to my last question. So University of Southampton Delhi is the first UGC recognized international university campus in India. Now, this is definitely a big moment. But how big do you think this really is for the changing and rapidly evolving Indian education landscape?
Very, 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 very pertinent question. I think, look, the Indian education system has evolved for a long period of time. I'm talking obviously here about the higher education ecosystem, right? If I look back at 1947, we had about 20 odd universities and we had about 300 odd colleges. At that time, they were serving, about 3 lakh people in total. And cut to now, wherein you have more than 1,300 universities. A lot of focus was on scale. A lot of focus was on trying to create more access. Right. So we've obviously reached a certain level through that. Have there been a lot of very positive outcomes? Of course, there have been very, very good positive outcomes. If you look at a lot of the CEOs across the world, if you look at a lot of the impact they've been able to create, and it's not just about CEOs or CXOs, it is also about the kind of startups that we've created outside as well as in India, the policymakers, the thought leaders. I mean, something tells me that the higher education ecosystem has been able to contribute and has done yeoman service to India. Now it's a question of how do we ensure that the foreign or international campuses coming into the country, coming in with their own thought processes, their own systems, their own global quality assurance processes, faculty, coming in, how can that act as a force multiplier? How can that act as a mechanism to be able to further enhance the contribution, right? So I think as individual campuses, as individual international universities, also working in tandem with Indian universities, can create a lot of very good experiences, can create the right kind of ecosystem going forward. We know that at this moment of time, there's a lot more focus in the last few years on the quality side. There's a lot more focus on reducing the variance, in how or what education is delivered right now. So I think there's a lot of good that can come out of the international universities coming here, whether as individual universities, whether as a group, whether as an ecosystem. I think what does India need? India needs service orientation, a service economy boost. It also needs a manufacturing boost. It needs more innovation. It needs a lot more products that are coming out of the country. It needs a lot more focus on the research side. It needs a lot more focus on the research translating into impact side. And I think this is where a lot of foreign universities can contribute a great deal. If you look at University of Southampton, there's been a lot of focus. There's been a lot of very good research impact, knowledge impact that has been created in the climate sciences and the economics and the management, in technologies, in artificial intelligence, in oceanic sciences. These are all areas, of effectiveness. These are all areas of excellence that can all be brought into the country. And of course, that can contribute a great deal to the development. So I see this as a very positive move. I see this as something which can truly be a game changer in the Indian context.
And exciting times lie ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Dr. Talwar, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for taking out time. And on behalf of Times of India, we wish University of Southampton Delhi all the very best for the next academic calendar.
Very kind of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This conversation reminds us that the future of higher education is no longer defined by geography alone. It is defined by the quality of learning, the strength of research, meaningful engagement with industry, and the ability to prepare students for opportunities that extend far beyond national borders. The arrival of University of Southampton Delhi represents an exciting new chapter, not only for students seeking a globally recognized education, but also for the future of higher education in India. Thank you once again for joining us. Until next time, my name is Daksh Sethi. Goodbye.